I hope that the productive way moving forward is to really think about that as a collaborative co-design process, right? Like we talk about co-design with other humans. No reason we can't talk about co-design with other intelligences.
Hello, I'm Doug Powell. Welcome to This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. In recent years, AI has become the dominant disruptive force for businesses and scaled organizations in every industry and global region. And as we all know, this is having a dramatic effect on the profession and practice of design. Over multiple episodes this season, I'll be examining the impact of AI on design and design leadership from a variety of angles. I've had the chance to visit quite a few university campuses recently, and I've been particularly curious to see how AI is showing up in the academic design environment. How are students responding to the possibilities presented by AI and the immediate access they have to it? How are design educators integrating AI into their curricula, coursework, and programs? Importantly for design leaders, what does all of this tell us about the generation of designers who will be stepping into the profession and into our teams in the years ahead? My guest for this episode is Professor Jonathan Hanahan of the Sam Fox School of Art and Design at Washington University in St. Louis. Jonathan brings a deeply technical practice and experimental approach to teaching design, an approach that is sometimes at odds with the more traditional and craft-oriented graphic design foundation that the Sam Fox School is built on and known for. Later in the episode, we'll hear about the new cross-disciplinary graduate design program just launched at the school. But first, we open our conversation with Jonathan telling me about his early career as an architect and how that has shaped his work as a designer and educator.
So I studied architecture in undergrad and have a 5-year professional architecture degree that I don't use. I don't regret that at all. I think that education really framed the way I think about design. And I think understanding space and experience and sequence is something that you really learn designing, buildings and spaces people are going to occupy. And that's actually something I really noticed when I first started teaching, how valuable of a skill that is in a largely, in a graphic design foundational discipline. The idea of thinking beyond two dimensions is a huge asset. And I think that's changing with more systems and interaction oriented design foundations. But when I first started, I really noticed that. That said, I think I'm just too impatient for architecture. I entered the field in 2008, which was a really bad time to be an architect. So I had kind of a pretty corporate healthcare architecture job, which was fine to start. But I was, working with people who had been doing it for 10 years and had never seen anything they'd worked on actually be manifested, right? So I had an opportunity to go to Amsterdam, and I worked for this publication called Volume Magazine, which is really like a architecture, culture, critical thing run by Rem Koolhaas. Rem Koolhaas, the architect, has a relationship. It started from their studio and then became this other thing. But what I noticed is we would work just as hard as we did as architects, doing research and writing and doing diagrams. But we'd do that for 3 months. And then you'd have thousands of copies of this thing, and then you could give it to people and see them interact with it. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever experienced. So I went and got my MFA at RISD, really thinking I was faking my way through graphic design. I thought I was pretty good at it, but I wanted a really strict typographic education. And I always had thought that the internet was, at that time, was just a place to put posters, a place to stick flat stuff.
Give us a point in time here. Where are we in the arc of time related to the internet, for instance?
So that was in 2012, right? Which I knew what the internet was, but I didn't understand the structure of it. So I took this amazing class with one of my mentors named Clement Valla. It was an introduction to coding, but it really broke down the internet as a occupiable space. It made it spatial. That was the moment I realized oh, this is architecture. just a different type of thing, right? Like we move through it, we build different types of spaces, we nest spaces, so we nest smaller things inside of larger things. And that like really transformed the way that I thought about practice and I thought about my research, and has really continued through my time as a professor, is really around the idea of building thick interfaces, which are different types of experiences like websites, videos, media, objects that kind of take familiar digital experiences and momentarily slow them down or break them, or really try to like expand them in a way to understand the complexity of what those things actually are. And like saying like your phone is not magic, right? Like it feels like this magical piece of glass. In reality, it's a very clunky, complex, messy thing just inside of a shiny package. So a lot of that work, both like experimental and commercial, that I've done is constantly wrestling with this relationship between physical and digital experiences and thinking about when they overlap, when they can be pulled apart, honestly, personally, as a way for me to understand it, but also as an opportunity for other people to like form a relationship with what does this mean. And I often say like I'm constantly both obsessed with and terrified of technology, and this is like the way to kind of wrestle with that relationship.
Well, you're deconstructing it, you're demystifying it for yourself and in turn for the audience, for the user. And there's something kind of, I don't know, kind of intimate about your approach. And I love that. I love the reference to classical architecture as a practice and relating that sense of space to the digital environment. What is success in the type of work you're describing, where you're in, forgive me, you described it as a thick interface. Did I have that right? That was the first time I'd heard that term. Is it enlightening the user into the complexity or the inner workings of the technology, or what is the objective there?
What I really liked to do was create things that like someone could initially approach and have a preconceived assumption of what it was, and then after experiencing it, realizing, oh, this is something very different. So a really good example of that is I did this project called the 45th City, which basically I found this old browser plugin called Tilt 3D, which basically it was like a web inspector, but it allowed you to look at a website in 3 dimensions. It made like a 3D model of it. And basically what it would do is take every element in the DOM structure of the website and just give it thickness. And so as things nest, they kind of build. And it was supposed to be this like a new way to like code front end stuff. This is how you were going to use the web inspector. Really, it was just a toy. Like, it really didn't do anything. It was just like, oh, look at this cool website.
I can imagine how buzzy that must have been when it first came out. Like, this is it. This is the coolest thing ever. And then to your point, yeah, it's a toy.
It's been tried a couple of different ways, and different browsers have tried it. It's just like, and now it's just gone. So what I did, and this is actually a process I follow a lot, is I try to take like a tool and a subject and pair them together. Just let the output happen. What I did was just started plugging, this was in right around the 2016 election. So fake news was a big thing. So I just started plugging fake news websites into this thing just to see what they look like. And they built these like amazing architectural cities, these like beautiful things. Whereas websites that were actually what you would say reliable were actually really boring. Right. And that's, I think largely that's because these fake news websites, they're never meant to be seen. So they're just like full of junk and clickbait and all this sort of stuff. Whereas the New York Times has a team that's really trying to like
keep it tight,
keep it really tight, make it load fast, all this sorts of stuff. So anyway, for the show, what I did was basically, I kind of went through this huge list of fake news sites, found a bunch of interesting ones, and then I just 3D printed them like at a large scale.
Yeah.
And so you'd really come into the show and just see this big white monolithic architectural object, and then worked with an architectural renderer, and we took one of these models and skinned it like it was a real city, and we sort of decided what materials should apply to what types of content. And the idea was you would come into the show, you would sort of experience these objects as objects, and form your own conclusions. And then as you sort of exit, realize what they actually are. And it's sort of like is intended to have this sort of double take of like that stuff is like material.
Fascinating work. And you're beginning to plant some seeds that we'll revisit a little later in the conversation around, provoking students to explore technology in these ways that I imagine are not how they're used to encountering technology. You found your way to the Sam Fox School at Washington University in St. Louis. Tell us about that program. A lot of kind of interesting characteristics, I imagine, to that program. And you must be a creature from another planet in that environment, because of the sort of history of the program and the emphasis of the program has not, as I know it, been super technology forward. Here you come with some pretty radical ideas, I imagine, about how technology can inform that academic experience.
The thing that really drew me to it was the nature of the Sam Fox School being this like partnership between the College of Art and the College of Architecture and the museum, but really thinking about interdisciplinary practice, and that was really exciting. I came in to the program at a time that was, it was really a graphic design and illustration program. I think there was an intent to, spin up a little bit more of an interaction design curriculum. And honestly, that was really challenging at the beginning because academic curriculum are like cruise ships. They're like really hard they take a long time to steer. So we kind of were cobbling together a lot of these things. When we started to introduce a lot of these more interaction design classes, students with that foundation, they kind of built up this, like, they're really good at making books and making objects. And as we started to ask them to like, okay, now let's make stuff on the internet and let's think about code. Let's think about responsiveness, right? Let's think about how a thing isn't a fixed object. It has to like adapt to different screen sizes. There was a lot of hesitancy. Like, I'm really good at this. This is very different and hard. Like, I'm just going to stay over here.
Right. Right. There's a whole shift in the comfort zone for the students, but I imagine for the faculty and the administration as well, because the whole emphasis, the value, the sense of craft and output, and that finished object at the end of the work, which is such a powerful part of that type of a program and that particular program. And you're coming in and saying, yeah, that's nice. That's not really what we need to be looking at here.
It's been really exciting to see the curriculum evolve over the past 10 years since I've been there to really start to embrace more systems-oriented design practices. So that the two things that have really bubbled up in our undergraduate curriculum over the last couple of years is a focus on interaction design and human-computer interaction, and also a focus on social design as social practice. So, two things that really share a lot of similar characteristics, just being applied to different scales, right? So, and really, at the end of the day, thinking of a more like human-centered practice and less object-centered practice. And there's still a very strong emphasis in craft. And I think the way for graphic design and illustration, but also really thinking about, starting to think about digital craft and how those skills, how we can translate those skills to digital experiences as well. So,
what does craft mean in the digital space as opposed to the traditional spaces?
The way we talk a lot about just like micro interactions and thinking about how things happen, not just what they're intended to do. So like clicking on this takes me to this, but really thinking about like, well, how does it take you there, right? Like what happens before I click it to know what it's going to do? How does that translate to clicking it and then after, to reuse the thickness idea, like stretching those things out so that they have material, right?
Yeah. So talk about the actual sort of coursework that you're leading, the curricula that you're building. How is all of this showing up in the classroom?
Yeah. So we launched a human-computer interaction minor in partnership with the School of Engineering, and that's been a really exciting partnership. For a long time, there was hesitancy to build this relationship, and from the campus, like engineering and art and design were kind of like off campus. We did this big master plan change, and it's really now design and engineering are really like the gateway into the campus. Yeah. And I've realized that both physically and experientially is like really defining the future of research, coursework, all kinds of conversations are happening at that intersection.
The proximity is just so really, really powerful. I mean, to your point, physically, these buildings, these facilities are right there, right next to each other, essentially.
So that minor is really about, it kind of started with the idea of giving design students an understanding of like the back-end development skills, giving engineers more front-end skills and craft and design and typography, et cetera. And then also giving students from across campus both of those things. So I think we have over 200 students in that minor right now from all across campus. It's like a huge mixing pot that just keeps growing as these conversations around AI and emerging technologies really picked up last year. That number skyrocketed again. And so it's really exciting to see. And it's also really changed the demographic of the classes that I teach, which has been really exciting too, is that originally it was like, here's 16 artists and designers you're teaching. So you can throw all kinds of weird stuff at them in their game. When that's shifted to like kind of 50-50, like 50% designers, 50% engineers, there's a lot of pushback. And it's actually really hard to teach to that group to start. But I really, really enjoy it now because they balance, or they kind of lean on each other in ways to kind of support each other, both from a technical and creative thinking perspective.
What was the pushback like from engineers, I imagine, who were coming into this environment and you were approaching them with big, ambiguous ideas and challenges and provocations? Is that the space that they were uncomfortable with?
I think it was a theme. I mean, maybe a theme that's starting to come out in this conversation is an approach to technology through like slowing it down. Going back to the micro interactions thing, I teach this advanced interaction course, which is it's just a series of prompt-based projects, each one around one micro interaction. So like we do a project that's all about clicking. And so it's not about content. It's just about like the act of clicking on something is the subject. So for example, on the first day, I make them do this quick sprint exercise where they have to make 100 different click events. So they have like a week to make 100 events. And we do this exercise before we even start. We're like, let's just list, like as a group, let's list all the things that clicking on something could do. And like the first 25 are very easy. The next 25 are a little challenging. And then the last 50 are like trying to think of the most absurd thing that could possibly happen. So in that instance, that engineering mindset is like, okay, here's the problem we're going to solve. Like this, I click on this and this happens. Now we're saying, well, let's just like kind of stitch all these things together in different ways. You know, really those last 50 end up being, what if I combine a bunch of different things from the first 50? So the results are very often useless and silly, but we really are trying to like take an expected activity and produce an unexpected result. Those types of things, like, I just want to get this done. Like, what do I have to do to get an A? It's like, well, that's not really how we're going to work over here.
Right. That's got to be. I mean, you know, this is in an elite academic university with students who are high performing and have always, if they're at that university, they've had success as students their whole life, and here you are turning all of that upside down on them. That alone has to be, just kind of an assault on their way of working and thinking.
The way that our curriculum is growing is starting to realize that these principles between graphic design and interactive based technology design they sort of grew apart, and now they're coming back together. And so the balance that we have in a lot of our coursework is like having a series of courses that are really focused on, these are the best practices and then simultaneously we have courses that are like, now take those things and just like speculate and go a little crazy and do more experimental work. The students in the College of Art kind of expect that. The students from outside come in, and it's really interesting. Like on the first day, we talk about like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And you can tell like, these are the students that are just, I'm out. Right. Mm-hmm. And then you have this group that's not sure, but wants to stick around. And they often do like really, really incredible work once they get into that idea of like, let's ask some of these critical questions. Yeah.
Well, the opportunity for interdisciplinary blending of students with different skills, different backgrounds, different academic areas, but really just sensitivities and areas of interest and ways of working that's just got to be so fun. And so relevant because, of course, when the students get out into the world and the rest of their life and career, they're going to be working in these cross-disciplinary environments and ecosystems. I visited campus last fall of 2023, and spent some time in one of your classes. You were demoing a project on the day that I was there that I found fascinating. So let's start with the course itself. Tell us about the course and kind of the intent of the course, the students that you had in that class.
The course is called Conditional Design, and is my favorite. It's my favorite class to teach because it is a little bit of an experimental way to think about how we design for technology and how technology really works. So the premise of the course is to basically take procedural practices like writing code, but designing non-digital things from that. Essentially, we're going to write rules, we're going to create conditions, we're going to do a lot of these different elements that we would do if we were writing a computer program, but we're going to apply them to physical objects. So it's a really, really fun class because, especially in this context of both designers and engineers, is because, the engineering students have a really strong grasp of those procedural processes, but they lack skills and kind of the output that we're thinking about. And then the designers are kind of the opposite. So they really start to come together in interesting ways. So, and the projects are usually really focused on basic computer science principles, like writing if statements, like if this happens, then this happens, or creating loops, which is one thing done over and over again, and each time it's slightly changed.
So it must be challenging, equally challenging for designers and engineers, designers who are used to, even obsessed with controlling the end product at a very high level of fidelity and detail. That's what is instilled in designers. And yet in this approach, they can't. They're required to let that go and to pay attention to a whole different set of parameters. And then the engineers who get the appreciation for that end output based on how they construct the inputs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and so some of the things that come up a lot is the object that you make at the end might be really ugly, despite a really beautiful process, right? And so we think about actually the process is the output, not the object, right? And I think it focuses on how do I document a non-static thing, right? So, I can't just turn in the final thing that's created, because if I don't know how it was made, I can't really evaluate it. The class is really about usability testing, trying a thing, learning from it, adjusting. And so knowing how do I document this thing through the process so that I can capture the scope of it. There's I think there's really interesting examples in, the history of design and art. One we talk about in class a lot is the Rauschenberg painting called Erasing de Kooning, which is the process was he asked de Kooning for a drawing that he could erase. And so de Kooning chose something that was what's going to be really hard to, what's the hardest thing to erase, right? And so the final work is this beat up, sort of hazy thing, but it also kind of represents the relationship between the two artists, right? Rauschenberg was kind of taking over as the star, and de Kooning was his mentor. It's all this crazy stuff, but the thing on the wall, this beat up piece of paper, without that context is really... It's uninteresting, right? But the process of how am I going to erase this? Trying different those types of things are really interesting.
Yeah, Saul LeWitt,
right?
20th century artist of that similar era, who the work was the instructions to recreate the work, and brilliant. And I know you reference the more recent work of Studio Moniker.
Right.
The Dutch design team who really specialize in conditional design and do brilliant work. And that's super fun, and just must be fascinating to see students kind of grapple with that in real time. So then this project that you were demoing, you were introducing a new project. Tell us about that project.
The premise of the project is basically an if-else statement. Basically, we bring in a JavaScript library that's been trained on, can recognize human poses through a camera. And so the students create single serve websites that use the camera, that as they act things out, different things can happen. So if I open my mouth, bubbles come out. Or like if I touch my nose, I turn into a cat. So, trying to like link a bunch of simple, silly things together.
And they're literally using the camera on their laptop, standing in front of the laptop, touching their nose, something happens, lifting their arm, something else happens. So it's very crude, as far as the fidelity of it, right?
Yeah, it's clunky, but in the context of the tools that we're using they're very powerful, but they're a little messy at the same time. And, I think that helps in a course like this because they only have 5 weeks to do this project. And there is a tendency, especially with emerging technology, to look out and be like, oh yeah, I'll just make that. I play these video games all the time. I'm just going to I'll make that. So let's strip it down to like the single essence of what you're trying to do and just make that one experience really rich and snappy. And like this idea of digital craft comes back. Like, let's just think about one root experience and really make that dynamic.
I believe part of the requirement of the project, as I remember it, was that you are using ChatGPT to generate the code that creates these different outcomes.
Yeah, this is actually something I did for the first time. It actually ties to that Solowit project where, okay, these are the outputs you're getting when you write rules for people. What would you have to do to create the same output by collaborating with an AI, right? So they start by just like literally plugging in the rules that they wrote and seeing what it spits out, and then starting to like manipulate and shift those questions or requests to kind of get as close as they can, but also realizing that at a certain point, if the tier 1 goal is to like match the physical output I'm getting, there's a point where they start to realize like something interesting is happening through this collaboration. Like, let's see where that goes. Yeah, that was the first time I've brought a tool like ChatGPT into the project. But really what it leads to is thinking about writing code moving forward as this collaborative pair programming exercise with another intelligence.
So you were as you were demoing this, you had your laptop open and you were using that camera. So you were actually doing the project or the early stages of the project in real time with the students. And you had ChatGPT open, and the provocation for the AI was write the code in such and such a language for this particular tool.
Right.
So that when I put my hand on my nose, a big blue circle appears over my head. And then you pushed enter and you got some code back and you tried it out and some version of that happened, but you really had no idea what it was going to look like or if it was going to work. And then you went back and iterated on that. You sharpened the provocation. Oh, that circle's too big. Let's see. Well, let's put some parameters on that. Oh, I think I want it off to the side of the head. So let's try to get the AI to do that for us. So yeah. So I mean, I found it fascinating because you were out there like. Forgive me if I got this wrong, but you did not know where that was going to go, right?
Well, I had tested it before,
okay,
and I kind of thought it would work. It was a Instagram Live moment, like this is go a bunch of different ways, but both in my own practice, but also in teaching. Like, I love constraints, right? So being able to put as many constraints on yourself as possible as a process. And why that exercise of like recreating the thing on ChatGPT is interesting is because the constraint was you can't write the code yourself. Even if you know how you could go in and edit this thing really quickly, it's really an exercise in like prompt generation. How do I ask the right questions to get to what I want? And what it leads
how do you provoke your artificial teammate,
right?
Your collaborator in this case.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you provoke them to help you do that thing?
Right. And so what you notice is like, okay, I asked it to do this and it named this variable this way. and maybe it makes sense, but maybe it doesn't. I didn't tell it to name it that, but now I'm riffing off of what it's generating. I think what I really like about that exercise is it adds a practice of empathy with another intelligent thing. I find myself, maybe others don't do this, but I find myself asking questions more politely. I don't know. I don't demand. I ask, could you please? And then it spits it out, and maybe it didn't really work. And then often my next prompt will be like, that was great, but can we do this a little bit? And it is a relationship, right? Because you're in dialogue. Maybe that's like one of the more important aspects of how we think about working with these intelligences. I don't even like to call them tools necessarily, because they're bigger than that, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's terrifying. Jonathan, you've gone over. You've stepped into the matrix in this awesome and weird way.
I've been thinking a lot about this because there's obviously a question that the field of design, but also just society has to deal with. I've come to realize that every article you read talks about this thing was made with AI, or this thing was made using AI. And that framing is often used interchangeably. And I think, in my mind, there's a big difference between with and using. And I hope that the productive way moving forward is to really think about that as a collaborative co-design process, right? Like we talk about co-design with other humans. There's no reason we can't talk about co-design with other intelligences, and that don't even have to be artificial. Like I think James Bridle has this amazing book called Ways of Being, where he really talks about the idea that there are many intelligences in the world: artificial, human, organic, etc. And only this human dominating approach, that human intelligence is the best intelligence, all other are subservient. That's when this like power dynamic, that's what creates AI is going to take our jobs, right?
Yeah.
The idea of making those things more horizontal and inspiring one another, I think presents a really exciting opportunity for students who all honestly are afraid. They're going to school to do this thing, and the world is telling them that thing won't exist anymore. What do? Having an adaptive approach that says, like, how do I do this in the best way?
Yeah.
How do I not fight it? I don't know. Maybe that's the best way forward.
Well, I'm curious then, how did the students respond to that project? And did you notice any patterns, for instance, between, you had design students and engineering students in the same class working on the same project? Any similarities or patterns that you saw across the group?
The most obvious thing is it is able to empower designers who don't have as much experience writing code to feel like they can actually do it. I think the other argument that often floats around in the world is like, well, now you don't need to learn how to write code because it's just going to do it for you. And this exercise is really interesting because you might not need to write it, but you need to be able to read it enough to understand what's doing what, to be able to ask the right next question. So in our undergraduate curriculum, we still require all the design students to take an introduction to code, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, stuff like that, knowing that none of them are going to write any of this, right? Because they're going to go and enter a team and introduce with engineers. They need to be conversational to be able to work with and design a thing that makes sense to be built. And so what I've noticed with this exercise of like forcing everybody to not write any code and ask ChatGPT to do it is it can be empowering for the designers to be able to like feel like, oh, I can express my ideas and generate the things that I'm interested in. I think for the engineers, I think that exercise of asking it to do a thing and it does something different, like this is like, let's just keep leaning into it a little bit more instead of saying like this top down, like I have to get to this. It's like, well, that's where we were starting. We were going there, but then we took a fork and now we're going somewhere else. And that's cool too.
And you mentioned a moment ago, there's a sense of fear or anxiety about stepping into a professional space where there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. I imagine that can also be, for the right type of student, kind of empowering, like, hey, I've got to figure this out. And there are all sorts of ways to figure it out now that weren't around 10 years, 20 years ago, for sure. Do you see students kind of embracing some of that just scrappiness, or are they tentative? Do you have to push them to go figure it out? Like, go get it. It's out there.
a lot of times when I would teach classes like this, I realized that I had to make a rule that I will not touch a student's computer, because if I show them that I will fix the problem for them, like they'll try it once at home.
Yeah.
They don't get it, and they're like, "Oh, I'll just ask Jonathan on."
Yeah, he'll show me.
Yeah, but if I won't touch the computer, like I'll kind of pair program with them, but it forces them to go out and try to find those answers. And I think that process of like asking a question, evaluating its result, then asking another question is like one of the most important skills, right?
Yeah.
So and then being able to evaluate the solution to then make the next decision, that evaluation process, that's a skill set that's really, really important. So I think it takes a little bit of work to build that into it, and a little bit of confidence too. I think students can get overwhelmed and like, I'm never going to find this solution, like
right. Because they don't know where the solution I mean, maybe they already found it, or maybe the solution is 100 miles away. It's harder in this approach and this methodology to know where you are.
I don't think there's anything that a student hates more than being told, just go Google it, because you're at this expensive college and you're like, no, they're expecting you to give you the answer. But like being good at asking Google things and now asking
ChatGPT
AI,
or AI.
Is a really important skill set. Prompt engineering is becoming a job. Yeah,
finding the answer and learning how to learn. Learning how to chase down those answers. This is all fascinating. I just have one final question. This is all kind of circling around the idea of critique, and critique, of course, a very sort of fundamental practice and skill of design and designing. And being able to scrutinize your own work and others' work, and to be able to have your work scrutinized in a rigorous way. And I wonder what critique looks like in these classrooms, because the definition of good or the definition of quality it's not what it traditionally has been for design, right?
Yeah, I sometimes get self-conscious at like end of the year reviews when we meet with all the students and they show all the work from all their classes, because there's like lots of beautiful stuff, and like the stuff that comes out of my classes is like pretty ugly.
Right.
And it's actually really hard to showcase to those not there why it's valuable and like what's beautiful about it. It's a little bit harder to see. Moving away from what questions to how and why questions is, I think, the most important role of design in general. We don't make the technology, we don't make the iPhone, but we make the experience with that thing productive, delightful, intuitive, etc. So these sort of critical questions of why would I use this thing, and then really thinking, how am I going to do it in these types of projects. These, like the drawing project or even the pose project, if somebody just stumbles across this website, like how do they know what they're supposed to do? That's a design decision. It's not just the thing, but actually the marginalia that explains to me how to use the thing.
Amazing stuff, Jonathan. I love how you're reframing many of the assumptions about how we consume designed experiences and how we create them. Hey, I know you've recently announced some big news at the Sam Fox School. Tell us about the new MDes graduate program. I know it's a program that will connect design to many of the academic schools and departments across the university. Give us the story. Like, what's the big idea here, and what possibilities will it open up for you as an educator and for your students?
We have recently launched a new graduate program. It's a Master of Design for HCI and Emerging Technology. How do we train designers, developers, entrepreneurs, and more researchers to work on complex problems surrounding technology and social innovation, right? Understanding that design thinking and practice needs to be at the foundation of big, complex projects. We've really tried to think about how we build a program that allows individuals to come in to research complex, challenging problems, to prototype out solutions, to deeply test them, and really, produce work that is real. The program is based in Sandfox in school design, but the curriculum is spread out between design, School of Engineering, School of Arts and Sciences, and also we're building both research and curricular partnerships with the School of Medicine and other institutes around there. There's a sort of really interesting moment at this university where design is being included at the table in a way that historically here, but also I think everywhere, it never really was. It's been a really interesting process to launch a program that is centered in design, but is distributed across an entire Tier 1 research university.
That's all for this episode of This is a Prototype, the Design Leadership Podcast. Special thanks to Scott Leach of Brandspeak Communications for his production assistance, and to Graham Barton for his original theme music. I'd love for you to help me grow the audience for this podcast by liking and following it on your favorite podcast platform. And I'd also love your help finding great design leaders for future episodes of the show. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn with your ideas. You can find out more about my work as a design leader on my website, dougpowell.design. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.